Okay, I'm back. It is the morning after the night before. Apple just held their scary fast launch event here in, well, the Big Apple, Apple in the Big Apple, which we don't see very often, and we got new MacBook Pros, we got a new 24-inch iMac, still no 27, sadly, and of course the real highlight was Tim Cook saying good evening.
Good evening.
But ahead of my reviews, which will be coming soon, I do have a few thoughts about the event, the new MacBook Pros, some buying guide tips perhaps, and also maybe there's a couple things that you may have missed. For example, did you know the Magic Mouse hasn't changed at all? The keyboard and mouse still Lightning, no change there at all. Also, the event itself, all the A-roll Tim Cook was doing, was all shot on iPhone. Pretty impressive stuff. But first things first, let's pay our respects to the 13-inch MacBook Pro, the M1 Pro, which has been discontinued. So no more Touch Bar in any of the MacBook lineup, but it has been replaced by the new entry-level MacBook Pro 14 with the base M3. The only downside of that nice new cheap entry-level model is that it only comes with 8 gigs of RAM, unless you spec it higher, which is a bit unforgivable for the price, but we'll come back to all that. And also RIP to the space grey color. Well, except for the base model 14-inch with the M3, which does still have space grey, along with silver as the two color options. However, for 14 inches with the M3 Pro or Max and all 16 inches, it's now space black or silver, which I must admit I really do like. It kind of makes the laptop look more powerful, but also more understated and maybe even more professional, especially for the bigger 16-inch. And also, if you've ever used a MacBook, particularly the silver model, outside or by a window with the sun on it, it can actually reflect in the screen. The sort of bright aluminium chassis can reflect back, so space black should improve that. And yes, we do also get a color-matched MagSafe cable. I am a little bit worried about fingerprints. Apple said that they added an extra anodized anti-fingerprinty layer, but only on the lid, not the keyboard or the palm rest, so we'll have to see. So except for the space black color, the design is identical. Same as last year, same as the year before that, which is fine. It's still a terrific looking laptop, one of the best on the market, I'd say. I don't really mind the notch. I think we've all got past that. I would have liked maybe a small weight reduction, particularly on the 16-inch, but alas, no. Same speakers, same keyboard, same trackpad, same ports, of course, including HDMI 2.1, which was added last year, and almost identical screens. We do have the same 14 and 16-inch liquid Retina XDR displays, the same 120Hz ProMotion, same mini LED panels, so no OLED yet, and also the same max 1600 nit HDR brightness. The only change is they've bumped up the brightness from 500 to 600 nits, so a 20% boost, which is nice, and so it actually now matches the same brightness as the Studio display, although not the same refresh rate because the MacBook Pros have the 120Hz ProMotion. All Apple's displays are still stuck at 60Hz, but the extra brightness is certainly welcome, and that applies to the whole desktop, so everything in SDR, not HDR, which of course can still get brighter, although I would still suggest downloading the Vivid application, which basically unlocks that full 1600 nit brightness across the whole desktop, regardless of whether you're watching or looking at HDR content. That sort of goes for everything. I'm not sponsored, I don't even have an affiliate link, I just think Vivid is definitely worth downloading. So this year, like last year, is really just a spec bump, although it's a pretty big one. And Apple's introduced the whole M3 family. Now normally we just get the regular one, say the M3, and then the Pro and the Max come later. Although for now it is just the MacBook Pros and the iMac that have been updated. We'll have to wait for an M3 powered MacBook Air, and also probably an M3 Ultra, Mac Studio and Mac Pro probably next summer. But crucially, this family of M3 chips represent the first 3nm architecture design that we've had on a PC or a laptop, so ahead of Intel or AMD or Qualcomm or MediaTek. And that 3nm smaller design means it can be more efficient and also more powerful. So we have the usual faster processor, faster neural engine for AI tasks, but the big story, it seems, is around the graphics, with a next-gen GPU, which they say represents the biggest leap forward in graphics architecture ever on their Apple Silicon. And a big part of this is thanks to their new dynamic caching feature, which allocates the graphics memory in real time for each task. So only the exact amount of memory for each task is used, which leads to better utilization of the GPU and therefore significantly better performance. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on Apple's numbers and figures. I'll test all this for myself very soon, but they're promising some pretty serious, or should I say, scary fast speeds. Now, they did seem to mostly focus on the improvements versus the M1 family from 2 years ago. Obviously, the jump from last year's M2 is going to be less significant, but it still seems to be a decent upgrade. The top spec M3 Max can also now be spec'd with 128 gigs of their unified memory. Previously, it topped out at 96, and it now matches what you can get in the Mac Studio. They're also really pushing gaming this year. They had a whole room dedicated to it, there's a specific game mode on Mac now, and they were showing off Baldur's Gate 3, Life of Pi, Stray and others, all running on M3, which does also now support hardware ray tracing, and other features like accelerated mesh shading, which can improve performance. It just might even run City Skyline 2 smoothly. Maybe. It's one thing to have all that performance, that's great, but it doesn't really matter if the games don't actually run on Mac. And of course, the Mac's game library is significantly smaller than a Windows PC, but with the significantly boosted graphics performance, with the new tools, and with this focus on gaming, hopefully we'll see more developers actually optimize their games for Mac. So your very expensive and very powerful MacBook Pro can also be more of a gaming machine as well as a workstation. But it's still early days. Now my reaction is, wow, that performance seems fantastic. I can't wait to test it and benchmark it, but also, there's nothing it can do that my M2 Mac can't do, or even my M1 MacBook Pro couldn't do, really, just, faster, because we've just hit this crazy level of performance from Apple, which is not a complaint, it's just like, do you need an M3 Pro or Max? And I think it's getting harder for Apple to really show us why you need this level of performance, unless you're rendering a game and running Blender and editing 8K in Final Cut all at the same time. But I guess the flip side is, yes, you can pay ludicrous amounts of money to get this crazy high-end performance, which is fantastic if you are a proper high-level professional or your business is buying it for you, but it also means that you can get away with just buying the cheaper versions, whether it's, last year's M2 discounted or just the base M3, and that'll be more than fast enough for most of us. Also, while Apple are promising roughly the same battery life as before, and it's worth noting that the M3 14-inch will get you 22 hours, whereas the M3 Pro will get you 18 hours, so going up to the higher performance will have an impact on the battery. Also, one thing you may have missed is that the 14-inch now supports the high performance mode, which previously was only on the 16-inch models with the Pro and Max variants of the chip. Now it's on the 14-inch as well, so you can go between low power, automatic, or high performance, which basically allows the fans to run higher, therefore being louder, and also the temperatures increase a little bit, but it will give you better sustained performance. So that's one disadvantage of the 14-inch versus the 16 that's now gone away. So let's say you are tempted to upgrade to one of the new laptops. Which one should you go for? What spec? Well, it all depends, A, on how much money you have in your bank account, and B, also what you're going to be using it for. Obviously, they're the usual questions you ask. What I would say is, looking at the different specs and configurations, that I think the base MacBook Pro 14 with M3, the cheapest one, is the one to go for. The downside of that, before you press, I was going to say press play, before you press buy, what I would definitely do is pay the extra $200 to upgrade that to 16 gigs of RAM. Then you've got 16 RAM, 512 storage, an M3 MacBook Pro 14 for just over £1,800 or $1,900, which I think will probably be the best bang for buck, unless you need the Pro or the Max chip, particularly for graphics performance if you are rendering games, doing 3D CAD design, or super high-end professional video editing. As I say, for 95% of us, the base M3 should be enough, but I caveat that saying I haven't tested them yet. We'll have to see just how much of a bump the Pro and Max do offer and in what applications to get a better understanding of sort of what makes sense for you. Now, looking at the 14 versus the 16, it is quite a lot more expensive, but the difference is it starts with an M3 Pro. There's no base M3 for the 16-inch, so of course it's a bit more expensive. It is definitely worth going on Apple's website and doing the sort of model comparisons to see what each one can get, because it's also worth bearing in mind that if you want the crazy 128 gigs of unified memory, that is only if you go with the top spec M3 Max. And I think a fully spec'd out MacBook Pro 16 now costs like £7,200, which is a good deal more expensive than last year's top spec model, but that is because we do now have that 128 gig of memory option. Although, quick tip, if you're not quite sure what model or spec to go for, maybe pre-order a couple of different options, and then when the reviews come out, you can see how they compare. You can cancel the one or return the one that you don't want. At least that way you get ahead of the crazy shipping times, which have already started to push out to like the end of November. But what do you think? Are you tempted to upgrade, or do you think it's all just a bit overkill and far too expensive? Let me know what you make of the new MacBook Pros in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time right here. Well, no, not right here, not in my hotel room, back in the studio next time on the Tech Chat.